Well, I knew I wanted to write a funny book for teenagers. I didn't want it to be too serious, and I also knew that I wanted to write about girls being in a band, because it's something I feel really strongly about. I think more girls should be in bands, and I was in a band myself when I was 15, even though I was the only girl in it. So they were the sort of the two central things, and then the stuff with her mum and her mum writing the book sort of came in later, because I thought that one thing that everybody can relate to is having an embarrassing parent. So even though my mother was a teacher and not a author, she managed to embarrass us quite a bit. Sorry, Mammy. But she, my mum was not quite as bad as Rebecca's mum, but she was a teacher at our primary school. So it was something I knew about as well. And then I thought that could be a good sort of trigger for Rebecca's need to do something herself. So that's basically where it all began. There was a few different things coming together. I normally don't do any research, because I think if you do too much of it, it's going to start looking very artificial. For me, I mean, there's other authors who do a lot of research and it really works in their books and it doesn't show. But for me, I thought I would be trying too hard to sort of capture things. But there's been a few things, like in the last book, when Rebecca did a school musical, I had never done a school musical. My younger sisters did a long time ago, but they started doing school musicals literally the year after I left school, in my secondary school. So I found somebody, a very nice woman called Fiona, who is a school drama teacher, and I just talked to her on the phone for like half an hour, and she talked me through how they do the rehearsals and what the sort of schedule is, because I just needed to know that. I mean, I've done shows and things before, so it's not like I don't know what a rehearsal was like, but just to get sort of how they put it together in a school setting. So that was really useful. And then in the new book, without giving away any spoilers, a character comes out and a friend of Rebecca's is all I'll say, and tells Rebecca that she's gay. And for that, I did talk to a group of brilliant girls at a great organisation for lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender young people called Belong To, which do fantastic work, and they have a group for teenage girls there. So I went and talked to them about their experiences of coming out, and because that's something that that didn't really happen in my generation, because over 20 years ago there were very few teenagers coming out, and I think it would have been a lot more shocking for a teenager to come out then, because it just wasn't really done. So I was able to get a good idea from them about what a sort of realistic scenario would be, and they said that they just wanted to make sure it made it clear that it was a big deal for anybody to come out, even if they have cool liberal friends. That cool liberal friends aren't always don't always turn out to be as liberal as you hope, and even if they do, it's still scary. So I wanted to sort of do them justice, and I wanted to make it as convincing as possible. So they were brilliant, and they restored my faith in human nature. They were so funny and optimistic and brave, and they'd all had really good experiences, really. So that was great. So that was basically it. Everything else I kind of assume that teenagers haven't really changed a huge amount, which tends to be true, I think. So yes, I'm not sitting there taking down notes of teenagers on the bus or anything like that. I think I'm least like Alice, even though I'm very fond of Alice as a character. She's quite sensible and rational, which I certainly wasn't at that age, and I'm not huge as rational and sensible as I should be now. I think I'm mostly like Rebecca because her voice is quite like mine. Me and my friends were I think we were a bit more sort of slightly more into weirder stuff than our friends when we were that age. I mean, me and one of my best friends were writing a teen book based on John Waters films. John Waters, who made some amazing films like Crybaby and the original version of Hairspray, very sort of camp, outrageous films, and we were big fans. And actually, the original, he was called John Kowalski in that, but the original John Kowalski was in the book that me and my friend Jennifer wrote when we were 15, 16. Which was called Clean Teens and Hep Cats, and was set in the 50s in America, and was our sort of attempt to be like a sort of crazy John Waters films. So that's where I got the name from, was from my teenage book. So in some sense, we're really into music. I think I'm sort of like a bit of Cass as well, because Cass is a bit more sort of sarcastic maybe than than Rebecca, but mostly like Rebecca with a little bit of Cass thrown in, I think. Basically that you will have a boyfriend properly at some stage, because I wasted so much time in my teens just thinking, why haven't I met like the love of my life? Why haven't I met some, incredibly charismatic, Jack Kerouac, basically John Kowalski. That was what I was hoping for when I was 15, which I realised later was, really not what you should be hoping for when you're that age. And part of, I think, writing Rebecca's Fools was kind of like a horrible warning. Say, this is what you might think you fancy. But really, if you're a bit older, you will see that sort of pretentious, arrogant boy is actually quite annoying and not a good boyfriend. So I think really the advice I would give to myself as a teenager was, there's nothing wrong with you, and just wait till you get to college, you'll be grand. That would be my advice. My advice to a lot of teenagers is, first of all, if you haven't done certain things by the time you're 14 or whatever, that doesn't mean they will never happen. So if you haven't fallen madly in love, and if your entire romantic life has consisted of a few crap snogs with ineffectual boys, or indeed nothing at all, that's fine. There's it's not a race. So that's my that would be my advice to myself and most teenagers. You're grand, and keep going, and you'll be okay. And and also, I wasn't bullied or anything like that, but I do think if kids are having a hard time, I was actually quite, there was no serious drama in my teens. It was just all, just me feeling sorry for myself. But I would say to teenagers, if they are having a hard time, to always find a responsible grown up or someone they can trust and talk to them. But for the minor sort of angsty things, it was just like, you'll be alright. Give it a few years and read some good books in the meantime. You won't regret that. I started writing stories when I was very, very small, as soon as I could write, and I could write quite early because I went to Montessori, and also my mum's a primary school teacher, so I could write when I was about 4. So I think I started writing stories then, and then sort of forever after that I would start writing books, which would basically be thinly disguised rip-offs of whatever I was into reading at the time. So I'd read some fantasy novels, and then I'd start writing a fantasy novel, and I'd read a funny book about families, like Helen Cresswell's Bagthorpe books, and I'd write a funny book about a family, and then I would just get bored after 10 pages and not finish them. So it wasn't until I was always doing that, all through my teens. I sort of stopped actually writing fiction when I was in college, and then a few years after that I started again. But it wasn't until I really sat down, and actually when the O'Brien Press said that they wanted me to write an entire book, that made me write an entire book. So The Real Rebecca was actually the first book I finished, but I can't even count how many I started over the previous nearly 30 years. So a lot. But I always wanted to write, and my sisters all wrote me, we all were into that sort of thing, so we were kind of a creative household who liked making up stupid stories and read a lot, so it was kind of inevitable in a way. I write at a desk in what I ridiculously call my office, which is basically a box room with bookshelves and a desk and a table with my sewing machine on it, and also loads of books, because I get sent a lot of books for work, because I review books as part of my main job of being a journalist. So books arrive all the time, and then they end up in giant piles like this high all over the floor, so I sort of have to pick my way in between all the piles. So that's where I work, and I look out the window at the road, and I'm very familiar with all the dogs that live in the road because I see them being taken out for their walks while I'm trying to write things. And whenever I get stuck, especially writing the books, I just would go for a walk. I live quite near Clontarf and the seafront, so about 15 minutes walk from the seafront, which is a very nice place to go for a walk. And I would clear my head if ever I was being, just couldn't figure out where to go next with any of the books. That's what I would do, just go for a walk for an hour and then come back, and it usually did the trick, or at least it helped. So yes, it's not a very glamorous, exciting office. It's usually my cat is outside yelling in a very annoying way. So yes, it's quite boring, my working conditions. I think it is actually getting to do what I always wanted to do for, since I was very small, which is to write books and to make stuff up and make sort of entertaining stuff up and write about it. Because it's just something I've always enjoyed doing, and it is kind of amazing seeing books with your name on it. It's funny, you sort of get used to it quite quickly, but at the beginning it was just, that's actually me, which is kind of amazing. And then I get to talk to, I get to go and do events and talk at schools and stuff, which is good fun. And there's also, you get to meet other authors, and that's always fun as well. And then a few years ago I won an award, probably the peak of my career. It's all downhill from there. So that was kind of amazing as well, sort of validation for doing it. So it's really good fun. It is hard work, but people have proper hard work jobs. There are people who have to clean office buildings and mend the roads and do works that are go down mines, and work that's properly tough and not half as rewarding, and no one gives you an award for it. So whenever I feel like, oh god, this is so hard, I can't do it, I try and remind myself of that I'm pretty lucky to even be working in an office or my house, as the case may be. So yes, there are a lot of good things about it. I can't answer because there's so many different sorts of favourite books. There's my favourite 19th century novel, or my favourite sort of fictional diaries, or there's just too many. I always have to read several books at the same time, because there's books that you're sort of in the mood for at different times, and they're all good in different ways. Some of my favourite books, The Secret Diary of Adrian Mole, aged 13 3/4 by Sue Townsend, I think is still the best fictional diary about a teenager ever written. I don't think anything's come close to it, including me. And that would be sort of the perfect, I think, capturing of that mixture of being quite melodramatic, but being quite funny as well, and being quite sad in that case that's ever been done. I love a book by E.M. Delafield called The Diary of a Provincial Lady, which is a very funny fictional diary written in the 1930s by a sort of rural, not quite a housewife because it's a bit too posh, but they're very funny. I love them. And I Captured the Castle by Dodie Smith. I discovered a copy of it in my school library when I was about 16, and it was just, it spoke to me. It felt I'd never identified with the character as much. That's still one of my favourite books as well. I really like an author called William Maxwell, who's an American author, and there's a collection of his letters to and from a writer called Sylvia Townsend Warner, over the course of decades, and they lived on opposite sides of the Atlantic, and they just wrote to each other, and they started out writing for work because he was an editor at a magazine called The New Yorker and she was a contributor, and they just became good friends, and their letters are they just come across as the most wise, funny, intelligent, witty people, and they're just a joy to read, those letters, and they make you think that as long as there have been people like this in the world, humanity's okay. So that's one of my favourite books as well. So it's kind of an eclectic bunch, and a lot of writers like Noel Streatfeild and Dorothy L. Sayers and Dickens and Jane Austen and Elizabeth Gaskell would be favourites as well. So E.M. Forster, fairly eclectic reading list basically. It's hard to say because a lot of the authors I really like are dead and have been dead for quite some time. So it's hard to know. I mean, I really think somebody like Neil Gaiman has had a really interesting career because he's done a mixture of just really good comics and fantasy novels and children, for adults and for children, and I've always thought he was great. I first read the Sandman comics when I was a teenager and adored them. There's a few writers who Jane Garden is a writer I really love, and she's in her 80s now, I think, and still writing, and she's written some fantastic, very eclectic books, and she's got a great book about teenage girls during World War II called The Flight of the Maidens, which is the first thing I read by her, which I really like. And I love how she's managed to just keep writing and getting better and better over, several decades. She didn't start writing until she was a bit older as well, so I really admire her. And it's hard to know. I mean, Sue Townsend as well, who wrote Adrian Mole, and she's the nicest person I think I've ever interviewed. She was just absolutely amazing. I interviewed her about over 10 years ago, and she was just a delight. So she'd be somebody I admire a lot as well. She's kept writing and stayed really great over the years, so she'd be another heroine. And actually I think one of my big heroines, two big heroines who aren't alive anymore either, are Jill Tweedy, who's a British journalist who died about 20 years ago, but she wrote a very funny fictional diary called Letters from a Faint-Hearted Feminist, which I love. And Angela Carter, who I first read when I was a teenager, read The Magic Toy Shop, and who just changed the way I saw writing, just showed me how interesting prose could be. So they'd be two of my absolute huge heroines. C.S. Lewis said that nobody will write the sort of books I want to read, so I have to write them myself. And I think that's really the biggest tip I can give. Just think about what you'd like to read and then write it. Which I know sounds, is easier said than done, but if you don't know where to begin, I think what I was doing when I was growing up, and it did pay off in the end, was doing that. I'd read something and I'd love it, and it literally would be, I want to read more like this, but there isn't any more like this, so I'll have to write something that's a bit like this, with my own characters and setup. And I think that was actually really useful, because it sort of helped me figure out the sort of thing I wanted to write, because I read a wide variety of books, so I tried to write in a wide variety of sort of types of books myself. Read a lot. That's the single biggest thing. I mean, you do get kids who say they want to write, then you realise they don't read anything, and that's just ridiculous. I could say that categorically, you will not be a good writer if you don't read. And also join a library, because if you're not in one already, because you can just try loads of different books, and if you don't like them, that's fine, you just give them back, you don't have to finish them. You can just I found so many books that I love, like I Captured the Castle and The Magic Toy Shop, by just finding them in libraries and liking the blurbs. And completely, I Captured the Castle is quite well known now, but it was not well known in the early 90s, even though it had been published years before. So I would never have found out about it as a teenager if I hadn't just found it in a library. And so that's, yes, and just write and remember that nobody has to see it. So it doesn't matter if it's not very good, just get it down, and then you might think, oh, that wasn't great, but this bit in it was good. And then you could do something with that bit that was better than the rest. So, but the ultimate advice would be just keep reading. Read, and loads of different books, and just see what you like.